Spotlighting Hawaii's leaders.
We want to bring in Governor David Ige.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Lieutenant Governor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Mayor Derek Kawakami.
Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Spotlighting the issues.
Where is the virus right now in our community?
How much is this overall going to cost the state?
How are you responding to the community's concerns? Talk about the level of citations that you guys are writing.
Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.
Well, aloha, and thank you so much for joining us here on Spotlight Hawaii on this Wednesday morning. I'm Yanji Denise, joined by Ryan Kalei Suji. And Ryan, today we have a special guest joining us from the state capitol.
Yeah, a special and familiar guest joining us this morning is Governor David Ige to talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening here in the state. Good morning, Governor. Thanks so much for joining us again this morning.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Yanji. I really do appreciate this opportunity to talk with you and take questions from the general community.
All right, so let's jump right in. I want to talk specifically starting with COVID-19. We're seeing a continued uptick in the case counts that are being reported by the Department of Health. The 10th straight week that we're seeing this increase. Your thoughts of where we are right now as a community in dealing with COVID-19?
Yeah, certainly, Ryan. We are seeing a lot of COVID cases in our community. So I think the CDC placed all counties now into the red area. And I think that that's a concern. People need to be aware. And, you know, we all know what works. It is about wearing our masks, maintaining physical distance, and people should decide whether they want to take a risk of going into, you know, an event with a lot of people. You know, we know that it's safer to be outdoors than indoors, and certainly different activities that are outdoors are safer than those that might be indoors.
You know, the county mayors have been on this program. Those that have been on this program have been asking for, you know, either respectful masking, I think some are calling it, or voluntary masking, essentially. But none have made the move to actually mandate masks. Given where the numbers are right now, is that a consideration that you're looking into?
No, Yanji, we're not looking at mandating any activities or restrictions at this point in time. I think we are reminding individuals that we know what actions we can take to help slow the spread of COVID. You know, clearly if you're sick, and for those who are vaccinated and boosted, you know, if you get COVID, it'll be like a cold. So it'll be very mild from what we saw in the early days of the pandemic. But you still are infectious, and it's really important that you wear a mask, get tested if you become symptomatic, and really choose to isolate.
One of the indicators that you said that you'll continue to monitor as we moved into the second phase of this pandemic has been the hospitalizations and keeping in touch and on top of those numbers and tracking them. But what are we seeing with the hospitals, and what are the communications like with those representatives from the various healthcare providers?
You know, Ryan, we continue to see a slow increase in the number of cases. You know, we are approaching 200 COVID positive cases in the hospital. Just as a reminder, last summer when we saw the first Delta surge, you know, at one point in time, we had over 400 COVID patients in the hospital. So it is a concern, but it's not like it was last summer. What I'm hearing from many of the CEOs and the hospitals is that just like in the rest of the community, we are seeing more and more healthcare professionals getting sick or being exposed and really not being able to come into work. And as we continue to see healthcare professionals getting sick, it is becoming a strain on the hospitals. It's just the number of patients in the hospitals continue to be high, and the fact that we are seeing more healthcare workers get infected with COVID, that, you know, puts them out for several days to a week, depending on how severe the symptoms are. That is putting a strain on the hospitals that we see today.
On that note, George White has a question here. Hospitalizations hit 210 today, doubling the rate of approximately 2 weeks ago. They've flown in 200 personnel already on their dime. Are hospitals discussing emergency funding and staffing with you in the coming months? It's an interesting question because when we did have those nurses come in, when we've had other surges, the federal government has largely covered the tab for that. What are those conversations like? Because now the healthcare providers are having to foot the bill on this.
Yeah, certainly. And one of the things that might not have been made so public, when the federal government is paying for healthcare workers, they have to be dedicated to providing COVID care. And, that can be a challenge in some of the healthcare settings, especially because we're not seeing the kind of cases that we saw in the past. And even though it's increasing, the number who are in the ICUs, which really do require intensive care, is not as high as it was in previous surges. So, we are in constant discussion with the hospitals. We do know that they've brought in traveling professionals to help support their workers. And as I said, we are seeing more infected healthcare workers infected with COVID, which is impacting staffing at the hospitals.
Well, one area that continues to require masks has been our public schools. And of course, we are on summer break right now, but looking into the fall, when classes resume again, if we're seeing, the numbers that we're seeing now and nothing really changes, excuse me, do you think that schools should continue to enforce a mask for children attending public schools?
Yeah, Brian, one of the things that I keep emphasizing when it comes to masking in schools, it's more than just the fact that masking helps prevent the spread of COVID. If the children are wearing masks, then it really does reduce the number who would be subject to isolation and quarantine if someone should get sick. And that they can return to in-person learning a lot quicker if they're wearing masks. And the number of students who are impacted is really reduced significantly. So the masking policy for our public schools is really focused on ensuring that our students can be in-person learning for the maximum number of days. And, so I do think that if we see the number of cases continue as the new school year begins, I have a feeling that we will require masking indoors especially.
Is there a threshold? We've asked you this before, and I know that you're, hesitant to actually lay out a number in terms of a line in the sand. But, I know you're not considering it at the moment, but is there a point where you would consider bringing back indoor masking or gathering size restrictions or other mitigation measures that the state has implemented in the past?
Yanji, I think we will always be prepared to take the action necessary to keep our communities safe and healthy. But, today is very different than last summer, for example. We are above 75% of our community is fully vaccinated. And especially when you include those who were infected by the virus, the overall immunity in our community is actually quite high. So I don't anticipate reinstituting restrictions at this point in time. I do think that we need to focus on the things that we know work. You have to stay home if you're sick. And, I know, and I've been guilty of it when I'm working, that we always try and tough it out, thinking that we need to be in work. But there's so many more options today. So if you're sick, you have to stay home, get tested if you have COVID symptoms, wear your mask indoors. And certainly I'm strongly recommending to everyone that they should be wearing a mask indoors, especially if they're working with other people and you're not able to provide 6 feet of distance. Think about whether you want to go to events that are large crowds in indoor settings. Certainly that increases the risk of exposure to COVID and certainly increases the risk of getting sick with COVID.
Want to switch gears here as we talk about summer. We also talk about a lot of travelers that will be coming to our islands. There's predictions that this summer could match, if not break or surpass what we saw back in 2019 before the pandemic with the travelers that are coming to our islands. Your thoughts about, Hawaii's ability to welcome in these guests and not only welcome them in, but welcome them in safely as we see these COVID numbers and where they're at, but just this influx of summer travel that is expected and the impact that it will have on our communities.
So a couple of things, Ryan, we definitely are implementing the destination management action plans and the whole notion that it's not just about more and more visitors, it's about being focused on the visitors that we'd like to invite. I can tell you on my trip to Japan, the Japanese partners, the airlines, the tour companies really is embracing the Malama Hawaii notion. They're looking at, and we've provided videos to all of our partners that they can use in their promotions as well as in-flight education, talking about protecting our environment and being mindful visitors. So we continue to focus on that message. That's one of the reasons I said it's really important that Hawaii Tourism Authority is funded, because they are connected to our travel partners, and they've done a terrific job of saying that we want it to be different. We want to pursue visitors that are mindful. We want visitors who can be respectful and help us manage the health situation. And we are seeing that our partners are really being creative in finding solutions that can keep travelers healthy and safe, even when they visit the islands.
Since the last time we talked, there was that horrific shooting in Texas that left 19 children and 2 teachers dead in their classrooms. The whole nation has been reeling from that horrific tragedy. I'm interested in to get your thoughts. Do you think that the Hawaii Department of Education should create a specific policy regarding school shooters at active shooter scenarios to prepare students and teachers? The head of the Board of Education has said that it's time to consider one. What are your thoughts on that?
Yunji, we do have emergency plans in place for the department. I do know that they evaluate and review and make updates on a regular basis. We run drills in all of the schools every year on emergency situations and lockdowns within schools. It's not specific and only to an active shooter scenario, but it is consistent with what we would do should there be an active shooter situation. So, I think that we are all examining and re-examining what we do to keep our children safe in school. I think this tragedy is horrific, and I just cannot imagine if this actually happened in Hawaii. It's would be hard for the school, hard for the community to really deal with so many students, their lives shattered, and and I can imagine everyone on that campus, their entire life is changed by this incident. So we are looking at what we can do to improve our readiness for that. And I think our current policies that prepares us for emergency situations, I think is a good one. And we always need to be looking at how we can make it better.
On the same subject, we are getting some comments here, nothing specific, but a lot of just general comments about the crime rates. We also have seen shootings here on the island of Oahu over the last few weeks. And of course, an increase in crime. We know that is, of course, a purview of HPD as well as the mayor. But as a leader of the state, I wanted to get your thoughts on what we are seeing with this increased crime and what you think about what's happening here in our community with some of these acts like shooting.
I think it's certainly a concern for everyone, Ryan. We are seeing a more violent crime, I think. And I think during the COVID situation, we saw a reduction in activities just because there were fewer people out and about in our community. So I think it's a concern for all of us. I've had discussions and talking with community leaders about we've made significant efforts in the past to really look at community policing, engaging our community to identify those areas that are dangerous, try and inform our partners. So I think we need to re-engage all of those kinds of activities to make sure we can engage our community, identify areas that might not be as safe as others, and really look at how we can work as a community to reduce the violent criminal activity that we're seeing, and how we can do a better job of trying to diffuse it before it results in physical and gun violence.
On the subject of HPD, I'd love to get your reaction to Joe Logan being chosen as the new chief, given that he was part of your cabinet at one point. What are your thoughts on this new hire?
Yeah, thanks, Yanji. I did call him to congratulate him on his selection as police chief. And I know that people have asked me about, his son. I was not aware, and he never mentioned. I never saw it impacting his performance as adjutant general, and I really don't see how it would impact his performance as police chief. But I do wish him well. I think we all see how important the police are in our communities. We do see how community policing is really an important part of trying to reduce crime, and especially violent crime. It is something that we all have to work together on. Brian, as you had said, it is concerning, and it will take all of us, thinking about how we can reduce violent crime in our community.
I want to circle back to something that you had mentioned, and that is your trip to Japan. We haven't had a chance to talk to you since that trip, and wanted to get some of the highlights that happened there, and when you think realistically we'll begin to see that Japanese market and those Japanese visitors returning at a level where we once saw before the pandemic.
So, Ryan, it's really interesting, and I know that you've traveled to Japan as well. They're very structured and disciplined, and they do have a plan. Japan is being very methodical. I do know that starting today, I believe, they've dropped the post-arrival testing requirement. So I do know that we stood in line for 2 hours when we went to Japan because we had to take a PCR test, and we couldn't leave the airport until we got the negative test results to allow us to leave. My understanding is starting today, they're dropping that requirement for incoming travelers. They are also increasing from 10,000 per day to 20,000 per day entries into Japan. And for leisure travels, they are definitely focused on package tours. So, for anyone wanting to go to Japan, I certainly would go to your travel agent and see what package tours might be available. They are going to be slowly increasing, and I do know that Hawaii will get more than our fair share of Japanese visitors. We do expect that they'll increase the numbers that they allow to travel into Japan. I think you all have heard ANA is restarting their Honu service with the Airbus 380s starting July 1st. And Ryan, as a big island person at heart, we do expect Japan Airlines starting service to Kona International Airport beginning August 1st. And that really, allows us, we've talked about not just going for more tourists, but going for quality tourists. I think everyone agrees that the visitor from Japan is who we want to focus on. They're very respectful to the environment and to native culture. And they also want to engage in authentic activities. You know, they do spend money in tours. They go to attractions. You know, they are the kind of economic activity for visitors that we want to focus on.
I'm interested because before you left, you said that you'd be asking for some kind of special accommodation for Hawaii. I know that, you know, we had done very well in keeping our COVID rates very low, but if you look at the New York Times dashboard, I don't know if we're #1 today in growing case counts, but, you know, we've been right at the top in recent weeks. So how do you make that pitch that Hawaii is a safe place given our percentages at the moment? What have those conversations been like what were those conversations like rather when you were in Japan?
You know, I think we focus on a couple of things, Janji, and I did say, because we've seen how strict Japan has been in regards to COVID, I did tell them that I was the strictest governor in the country, and certainly we've had the lowest infection rates in the country for most of the pandemic. I am concerned, Janji, and yes, Hawaii for the first time during this pandemic had the highest per capita virus counts in the country for a few days. And that is concerning. You know, I think we have a very good relationship with Japan. We are working and ensuring that a Japanese visitor will be able to get health services if they need to, whether it be testing or treatment for coronavirus. You know, it's really heartwarming to see the visitor industry in Japan. One of the tour companies actually is including as part of their tour packages to Hawaii an insurance kind of program so that if someone should get sick while they're visiting Hawaii, the tour company will be covering the cost of isolation and quarantine. And they are making arrangements to ensure that they can get healthcare. So I think that those are the kinds of things that happen because we have personal relationships with many of the companies that do business in Hawaii. You know, there's not going to be an explicit set aside or different treatment for Hawaii, but I can assure you that on every tour company and every airline in Hawaii, the routes to Hawaii and the tours to Hawaii is a priority. They know that the Japanese residents want to travel to Hawaii as their highest priority.
Want to switch gears and ask about some of the bills that sit before your desk right now. We know that you are in the process of reviewing a number of them and deciding whether or not you want to put them on your intent to veto list. But specifically, I want to ask you, and I know you probably won't tell us, but wanted to ask you about a bill that would change the way a governor is allowed to use his or her emergency powers in an emergency situation. The legislature has put together and passed a bill that could limit that and could call back some of the orders that a governor makes. Obviously, this won't impact you, but your thoughts about this bill as it sits before you.
You know, I do appreciate, and we've worked very closely with the legislative chairs that were working on this measure, Ryan. We emphasize that, if you just take, for example, this whole COVID pandemic, I don't think anyone could have anticipated all of the emergency actions that we needed to take. You know, it was a brand new disease. Well, we didn't know whether there would be vaccinations. We knew that we had to institute a quarantine. But it's really hard to predict what authority a governor would have. So we've been stressing with the legislature that if you tie the chief executive's hands, it will only make an emergency situation worse, not better. I think if you look over the past years, and especially during my term, I don't think you can really point to abuses of executive authority by a mayor or a governor. I think for the most part, we have been responsible. And because I think that emergencies is an all of government kind of response, I've included the mayors in discussions and decision making. I think that, what I've heard from emergency responders, especially at the federal level, who come into Hawaii, they are always amazed at how much collaboration and cooperation they see between federal, state, and county responders. And I do think that that is something that makes Hawaii better. And I do think that the changes that the legislature proposes, I think has been responsible. I've expressed concern that it's impossible to know what authority a governor will need, and you want the chief executive or the mayor to be able to take action to save lives.
So I'm taking that as a yes.
Yes, probably. We're okay with that measure.
And I want to ask you about Senate Bill 2510. And I know you probably don't want to get into each bill specifically, but this one has gotten a lot of press. This is a controversial energy bill that would mandate that there would be certain, ratios of energy coming from different renewables coming from different sources. What are your thoughts on that bill specifically? Have you made a decision?
No, Yanji, I haven't made a decision, but thanks for trying. But I would say this, we've gone through it. I've talked with many. Probably we've had more calls about that bill than any other bill, except maybe the bail bond changes. And certainly, I'm trying to understand how it passed the legislature. I haven't been able to find any positive in Senate Bill 2510. We will continue to evaluate. I'm meeting with the agencies in the next day or so. But I'm still trying to understand how very, very high majorities of both the House and Senate members voted to pass this measure. It's sometimes hard to understand what the legislature had seen in this proposal.
As our time wraps up, not only today, but with you as a whole, as governor, one of the things that, we'd like to do in these remaining times that we have with you is ask you some more personal questions as you reflect back. Today, as we end, I just wanted to get an idea of what is something that you haven't been able to do over the past 8 years as governor that you look forward to returning to do as a normal citizen, maybe something that you weren't allowed to do or something that maybe you scaled back on because of your duties. But what is something that you look forward to returning to after your time as governor?
Ryan, I do really look forward to traveling, and just, it's hard to travel when you're governor because two things. If there's an emergency, you really want to be able to respond, and it's hard to really relax because something is always on your mind. So I do look to travel more than we have. Don and I have wanted to travel to Europe, and we haven't been able to do that. There are many places in the U.S. that we have talked about traveling to, but haven't been able to. So, I do think that that's the one thing that I'm and Don's really looking forward to, being able to travel, not have to worry that we have to get back to the state within that time frame, being able to travel anytime during the year so we can go and be at places that people suggest is a pleasant time to be there. And then not have to be so concerned about, being on vacation for a day or 2 days, but actually being able to think about spending a week or 2 weeks even in some of these areas to really explore it and experience it and enjoy it in a way that it's just not, every time I travel is a business trip, and being able to travel to enjoy it would be a very, very different experience.
I thought you were actually going to say driving a car, which is a form of traveling, I guess.
Well, I certainly will look forward to that. My kids said I shouldn't, but I did anyway. So especially when we've traveled on vacation.
Right. Well, thank you, Governor. We appreciate the time this morning and getting caught up on some of the subjects and topics that are front of mind for many here in the state, as well as just getting an update about some of the plans that you have post your office here as governor. But we always appreciate you spending time with us, and we look forward to our next conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Yanji. Thanks,
Aloha.
Ryan. Aloha, everyone.
Aloha. Great to hear from the governor, as always. We did start off at the top, if you missed it, talking about the rising case counts, the 10th straight week of increases when it comes to COVID-19 in the state. The governor did say that it concerns him. And he, like the other leaders that we've spoken to on this program, is asking people to voluntarily mask indoors. And if you don't feel like you should attend a large gathering, then please don't, if it's not, if your personal comfort level is not there. And also encouraging people to stay home if they feel sick. All that said, he is tracking hospitalizations, but says at this point he is not considering any kind of mandates for mitigation measures with COVID.
Yeah, it doesn't look like we will be seeing any of those types of announcements coming anytime soon. But the governor also saying that they recognize the numbers and where we're at right now, specifically as it relates to what we could potentially see with our schools. Of course, schools continuing to have that mask mandate, and if cases and numbers continue the way that they are in the fall after this summer break, that we could continue to see schools requiring that mask for children in the classroom. Yeah, you heard from him on the explanation about that, again, citing that time away from the classroom is harmful for children, even if they are in quarantine or isolation. And so finding ways to mitigate that process to remove them from the classroom for any period of time is something that they want to try to do, be it through masks or otherwise. We also got an update on the predictions of what's happening with tourism, saying that he's confident that the Hawaii Tourism Authority, as well as those travel officials, are doing their part in helping to spread the message about how to be a more responsible traveler, as we see as these numbers will continue to rise with summer travelers.
Yeah, and he talked specifically about Japan and mentioned some airlines that are restarting their routes, one to Kona and another here to Honolulu, and that will bring a significant amount of visitors to the islands, visitors that many in the state have been hoping would return quickly. And then we also did talk about school safety when it comes to mass shootings and whether or not the DOE should have a specific active shooter scenario training for students and teachers. He said that they are reviewing that and trying to figure out if that is necessary or if the current emergency drills that are in place right now are sufficient. Talked a little bit about Joe Logan, the new HPD chief, who will be coming in, and some of the issues that he's had with his son that have been making some headlines. He said that when Joe Logan was part of his cabinet, the issue never came up, that he had actually called Mr. Logan personally to congratulate him on the selection, and that he is hoping that he will be a very successful chief.
But also recognizing that there is an uptick in crime and saying that that continues to be something that is worrisome for the governor, and that's something that they will continue to look at monitoring and finding ways that the community can be more involved in the process as we continue to see some of these numbers increase in crime around our communities. We also heard from him that he is considering those measures that sit in front of him as the legislature have passed a bunch of bills. Again, the governor will put forth a intent to veto list. That does not mean that he will actually veto it, but he kind of puts together those bills that will be under further review. We have yet to see that list. That is expected to come out soon in the next few weeks or so. And once we get that list, we'll be able to see and get a better glimpse of what the governor thinks about some of these specific bills that many have been calling on to be vetoed as they pass through the legislature.
Yeah, so we covered a lot of ground. If you missed any of it, remember, you can always catch this as a podcast later this afternoon, listen on your own time, or watch the rebroadcast on Channel 50 KKI. That airs in the evening and in the morning. On Friday, we're going to be talking to Patrick Bronco. He's a state representative from the Windward side who has now thrown his hat in the ring to replace Kai Kahele as he pursues the office of governor. Mr. Bronco wants to head to Congress, and so we're going to be talking to him about why he is pursuing that seat.
We look forward to that conversation. We thank you for being a part of our show today. We'll see you right back here on Friday for another episode of Spotlight Hawaii. Until then, stay safe and aloha.
Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.